Thank you, thank you. Allow me to welcome you to the first day of the 2024 Planetary Summit. Thank you so much all for being here. Before I get to my prepared remarks, I just want to say a couple of words of thanks, provide some context for this. My name is Nils Gilman. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Berggruen Institute. For those of you who don't know, the Berggruen Institute was founded in 2010 in Los Angeles by Nicholas Berggruen and Nathan Gardels. And the purpose of the mission of the Berggruen Institute is to think about new ideas for a changing world, and specifically to think about things at the intersection of philosophy and governance. And as we'll see over the next 2 days, that's really a central idea of what we're trying to do here with the Planetary Summit. In the 14 years we've been around, we started in Los Angeles. We've since opened an office in Beijing in 2018. And 2 years ago, we opened this office here in Venice. And our goal is really to serve as a kind of platform for multicultural, multidisciplinary conversations about really important ideas. And let me just conclude these initial opening remarks by saying some really heartfelt thanks, particularly to the staff here at Palazzo Diedo and Venice Berggruen. And also to the staff from Los Angeles that have worked for months to put this thing together. We have a pretty exciting agenda and program for the next 2 days. I'll be hosting today, day one. Nathan Gardels, our co-founder, will be hosting day two tomorrow. We've left a lot of room in the schedule for all of you to talk to each other. In addition to the, I think, really excellent group of speakers that we've brought together, this group that we have, I've been looking at the entire list of people who have signed up to be here for these 2 days, is really an extraordinary group, a very interdisciplinary, multicultural group. And many of you, in addition to the speakers who will be on stage, are yourselves really important thinkers on the topic of the planetary. So I very much encourage you to try to talk to your fellow guests here, because I think that the conversations that will happen on the side of the formal program will be just as important as the conversation that happens here on stage. So without further ado, let me provide some additional framing for what we're trying to do over the next 2 days. So the history of the last 100 years can be told as a litany of crises. Especially since 1973, the year of the oil embargo and global fuel shortages, the world has seemed to lurch from disaster to disaster across every sector. Economic, from the global financial crisis and the Great Recession, to the broken supply chains and cost of living crisis caused by the pandemic. Political, with steep declines in institutional capacity, credibility, and legitimacy. Geostrategic and military, from 9/11 and the global war on terror to ongoing horrors in Ukraine, Sudan, and the Levant. Epidemiological, from HIV/AIDS to the recent COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, climatic, where every month seems to bring a new record temperature or a new acute weather-related disaster. This sense of multiplying and accelerating crises today goes by the name of the polycrisis, a term coined by Edgar Morin in his 1993 book, Homeland Earth, a manifesto for the new millennium, to describe complex, interconnected, planetary scale challenges that produce cascading failures if not addressed holistically. But despite this moniker, we seem to be learning little and acting not at all, continuously caught by surprise without the tools to respond. What's wrong? Take the COVID-19 pandemic. While the scientific capacity to detect and understand the nature of viral infections has improved exponentially since the old world viruses devastated the new world during the long 16th century, the capacity of our institutions to control the spread of pandemic disease has scarcely improved at all. At the same time, globalization has accelerated the rate at which viruses proliferate. Consider that the Black Death took 8 years to march from the mountains of Kyrgyzstan to Crimea. It took 3 months for the virus that caused the 1918 influenza pandemic to go from Kansas to Europe, and it took just 3 weeks for the virus to go from Wuhan to Italy and New York, where it caused thousands of deaths. And what was the institutional response to this planetary challenge? Everywhere, policymakers retreated to the national as a way to deal with this quintessentially borderless and planetary problem, an approach which almost universally failed to actually stem the proliferation of infections. In the end, what really bent the curve was the technological fix of vaccines developed at warp speed. But the pandemic is also interesting as a planetary phenomenon for its second-order effects, which underscored how intertwined our socio-technical systems have become with the biogeochemistry of the planet. As lockdowns spread worldwide, as planes were grounded, and as factories ceased production, skies cleared over the Chinese cities, and the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted globally plunged. Think about that. A microscopic zoonotic virus was indirectly altering the planet's atmospheric chemistry. Alas, all of this was temporary. After the World Health Organization declared the pandemic over in May of 2023, we went back to work, to our familiar frenetic pace of production and travel. For a brief moment, it seemed as if COVID-19 changed everything, but it didn't take us long to return to normalcy, to use the phrase that US President Warren Harding said after the 1918 influenza pandemic retreated. Of course, nothing's actually normal about our present normalcy. The naming of our own era as the Anthropocene signals that we've exited the ecological and climatic stability of the Holocene and entered a brave new world. As yet, we lack a proper language, I believe, to describe this world, much less institutions capable of restabilizing it. Overconfidence in our existing conceptual apparatus may, in fact, be at the core of our undoing. Rather than separating our problems into economic, political, or environmental buckets, we believe it's time to look at everything together and to become aware of our troubles as holistically planetary in nature. We could call this a planetary consciousness. One of the projects of this summit is to start laying the conceptual foundations for just such a consciousness, for a recognition of what we at the Berggruen Institute call the condition of planetarity. At the heart of the condition of planetarity is a comprehensive understanding of planet Earth as a staggeringly complex, interlaced, and nested array of dynamically interacting biological, chemical, energetic, and geological systems. This concept, in turn, is informed by the new knowledge of the place and role of human beings in this vast system. This idea of the planetary is best understood as distinct from the global and from the trajectory of globalization that has been described by commentators since the second half of the 20th century. Whereas the global is predicated on the coexistence, whether harmonious or otherwise, of fixed nation states in a world-spanning system, the planetary positions societies and systems of governance as specific places within a much larger multi-species and extraplanetary whole. Part of what makes our planetary condition impossible to ignore is the growing body of scientific data that illuminates the scale of biodiversity loss, the distribution and spread of pandemic disease, the garbage patches in the ocean, and every other planetary scale phenomenon that transcend our human political boundaries. The awareness that comes from the study of this could be called, following my colleague Benjamin Bratton, planetary sapience. That is, the growing scientific knowledge of the planet and about our embeddedness in it and effects on it. Recognizing our planetary condition simply acknowledges a long-standing reality. Human beings have already been part of the planet. We've never been masters of it. Unfortunately, post-Enlightenment epistemologies and the systems of governance we've built on top of them have for too long disavowed both of these facts. The long-standing and, in fact, eternal reality is that the flourishing of human societies is inseparable from the flourishing of the multifarious life forms of the planet as a whole. Now, in the face of this condition of planetarity, the impotence of national-level responses and the limitations of supranational bodies like the World Health Organization or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have become painfully clear. And I'll just note that the COP conference, which ended yesterday, did not have leaders from the United States, the European Union, with top leaders from the United States, European Union, China, or India, who are the 4 biggest carbon emitters on the planet. The actions of sovereign nation states are by definition demarcated along territorial lines and therefore cannot transcend to a planetary scale. To put it another way, the current multi-level global governance architecture is not fit to address the planetary challenges of our current age. Now, as many of our speakers this weekend will argue, and some will no doubt dispute, what's needed is a radical rethink of the very architecture of planetary governance in light of this condition of planetarity. Such a rethinking may entail new planetary scale political institutions, ones that fundamentally challenge the modernist premise of absolute national sovereignty. And legitimating such institutions may in turn require planetary scale modes of politics, ones that may go beyond strictly human conceptions of the political that are derived from the philosophy of Aristotle. But to be clear, in calling for a planetary governance and a planetary politics, we're not denouncing, much less renouncing, but rather augmenting and complementing global, national, and above all, local forms of governance and politics. How these scales of authority relate to one another will be a major theme that we hope to explore this weekend. These 2 days in Venice are meant to outline the possible beginnings of this shift in attitude towards governance. The first day today charts the philosophical underpinnings of the planetary consciousness. That is our growing collective awareness of the condition of planetarity. While the second day focuses on imagining a new architecture for planetary governance that will have to emerge from the desiccated chrysalis of national sovereignties. Drawing on climate science, political philosophy, international relations, and other disciplines, participants in this summit will offer complementary and sometimes contrasting perspectives on what such a planetary institutional framework might look like. And where better to have this discussion than in Venice? Venice has long been a cultural global crossroads, a meeting place for peoples from around the world, a city of trade, art, and enlightened governance. It also, of course, embodies the deleterious effects of anthropogenic disruptions to planetary systems as its waterlogged architecture groans and sinks around us. Venice has long been cosmopolitan, but it's now time for us to think of it in planetary terms. Now, a common question I get when I start proposing a post-sovereigntist system of planetary governance, even from those who are supportive of the idea, is how do we possibly get there from here? No doubt it seems hard to imagine what would prompt countries that today jealously guard their sovereign prerogatives to become willing to give up authority or power to planetary institutions. Here, I think the concept of social tipping points may be useful for highlighting the possibility of a particularly stark event that leads to a fundamental paradigm shift in attitudes that make previous political impossibilities suddenly seem possible. Kim Stanley Robinson uses just such a scenario as the opening scene for his recent speculative fiction novel, The Ministry for the Future, which imagines a catastrophic heat wave in India that kills tens of millions of people, that leads Delhi to embrace unilateral solar radiation management, which in turn freaks out enough people around the world that a previously inconceivable planetary scale cooperative order suddenly becomes imaginable. Institutional orders are conservative by definition, and it often requires a catastrophe or a very credible threat of one to catalyze a willingness to change. But as thinkers as otherwise different as Alexis de Tocqueville and Leon Trotsky have both observed, every revolution seems impossible in advance and inevitable in retrospect. Now, these might seem like untimely meditations, to borrow a phrase from Nietzsche, at odds with the present temper of restive nationalist, anti-globalist constituencies, particularly in light of Donald Trump's recent re-election. But as the Berggruen Institute's co-founder Nathan Gardels recently remarked in a column, actually last summer before Trump was re-elected, quote, "While the very real concerns which animate popular emotions at the polls can't and shouldn't be dismissed or diminished, the dissonant role of philosophy is to go against the grain of political immediacy, to insist on inconvenient truths." If nothing else, America's recent election underscores that legacy national institutions will not save us from planetary crises. Indeed, the long sunset of America's global hegemony makes the question of how to govern the planet more urgent than ever. Radical institutional innovation almost always takes place in the context of the massive failure of the old institutional order. It took several world wars and 150 years, for example, to get us from Immanuel Kant's proposal for a parliament of nations to the actual United Nations. It's arguable that Trump's re-election is both a symptom and a vector for the terminal crisis of the existing institutional order. What's inarguable, however, is that the biogeochemical foundation that undergirds the condition of planetarity. What we're contemplating this weekend are modes of governance that, however utopian at the present moment, are at least conceptually capable of addressing this condition. As Adam Frank, co-winner of this year's Berggruen Philosophy Essay Prize, who's here today, Adam, where are you? Hello, Adam. Put it in the winning essay, quote, "The planetary means recognizing that the organization of culture is always situated within planetary metabolic feedback loops. It also means that any new theory of political economy that doesn't have the word planetary in its intent has already lost the thread." And we would like to likewise add here, any new theory of international relations that doesn't put the planetary at its center has also lost the thread. What we aim to do over the next 36 hours is precisely to pull on this thread and perhaps thereby to begin finding our way out of the polycrisis maze. Thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome the first session onto the stage.